Okay, well, welcome. This is Old Testament Survey. If you were looking for New Testament Survey, that class was in the spring. That is not this class. Normally we would do those first, but we ran the Old Testament Survey a few times. I think probably 3 different times last year in the morning classes, but we hadn't done it evening yet, so we thought this would be a good one, and it's kind of a fun class to do as well. So that's one of the ways that arises. We have 20 people registered. I think this is the soft start of the class, however, because we don't have 20 people here, and I heard from a few, oh, I'm going away this weekend, but then I'll be back. Really, I am? No, honest. And I bought a book and everything. So, okay, well, it's all right. We understand there will be times. We do video record the sessions, and I will put them up on the YouTube channel under BP Academy for the church, and I'll send you all a link to that so you know where to find those. So if you are away a week, then you can catch up in the class and catch whatever's been missed. We are using the textbook Old Testament Survey. Does anybody need one? I see books around the room here, so I don't see one here that needs one. Still have some of those, so that's fine. I think what we'll start with then is the syllabus. It's first off, it says winter 2022. This is not the winter quarter, this is the fall quarter. The winter quarter will start in January, so if you want to do your first correction to the syllabus, we can just start at the top and we'll work our way from there. Is my mic on? Yeah, I believe so, yes. My mic is on. I'm seeing signal there and it's all good. Yeah. Let's see, course objectives. We want to learn the organization of the Old Testament, the law, the prophets, the writings. And we're going to do this from a structure built a lot around the Hebrew canon, and so the order of the books is different in the Hebrew Old Testament than it is in our Bibles as we have them. And so you'll find a surprise now and again at what we're doing. We'll also refer to some things as prophets that you never thought of as prophets. What we think of as the historical books, we will be referring to as the prophets or the early prophets, and then what you think of classically as prophets, we'll talk about as the latter prophets. There'll be some differences that way, but we will be putting things into the historical context and flow. We'll talk about major themes. We want you to be able to describe themes, purposes, and broad outlines of each book. We want you to be able to describe, we will have succeeded together, if you can describe at the end of the course a major contribution to the overall big picture Old Testament story. What contribution does this book or that book or this book make? And so we are going to be at the 30,000 foot level. This is a survey where there's a lot of details we're not going to get into. There might be details you want to ask about, and you can ask about them. Don't be offended if I don't answer the question. Some questions I'll try to field a little bit, but I might have to say, well, let's talk about that offline after class, something like that, just because it's a little more detailed than we want to stay up at the big picture level, by and large, for the course. I'll talk about the relevance of each book, both for the original audience. That's as I understand it, that's where relevance starts, with the original audience, and what did this writing mean to the original audience, and that's where we really get insight into the original intended authorial intent we talk about, the meaning, the intended meaning of the original author to that audience, and from there we can then make application into our day. So relevance for us will flow out of understanding some relevance of the original setting of the book when it's given. We want to describe, we'll talk about God's overall redemptive program. Number 2, understand the big picture of what God is doing redemptively through the Old Testament. We often think of Old Testament as law and condemnation and judgment, and New Testament is the gospel. That's when the good news comes. So there's bad news and there's good news. Realize the first Christians, the early church in the first century, preached the gospel from the Old Testament. We ought to be able to do that too. And I think that the intention there for us will be to deepen our appreciation of the gospel as we have it in the New Testament based on those Old Testament foundations. So we'll look at explain the beginnings of the redemptive program. Number 3, you want to know the basic framework of major developments within biblical history. There are several dates that are mentioned here. Let's pause and have a little fun here. Would anybody suggest a date for King David? King David. Does anybody know when King David was king? Give me an Old Testament date, a big scenario that you do know. Anybody? Pick a date, any date. Any dates of the Old Testament. We're really starting from scratch. Perfect. I'll pause that exercise. Well, no, let's try it. Okay, roughly, maybe 1010, but let's say David is roughly 1000 BC. Okay? How about the Exodus? There's a little discussion. Some people want to go with early date, some others want to go with a later date. I'm in the early date school because the Bible refers to a timing that requires an early date, which is classically 1446. So 1446, we have the Exodus. So the time of the judges, obviously if you have King Saul before David, then you have the time of the judges. Now you have 40 years, so you enter the land at 1406. Don't add 40 years, take away 40 years, because this is BC, right? Okay, so you're 1406, you enter the land, you've got a few hundred years of the judges, the time frame for all of that to happen, and before you get to David, so you got 400 years in there. On the other end, roughly, you've got the last big thing that happens in the Old Testament history is 586 BC. What is that? What is 586 BC? Babylonian captivity. Okay, off to Babylon we go. All right. So now, okay, if Exodus is 1446, when's Abraham? How long were they in Egypt? 400 years-ish. So for the 400 years, then you're looking here, you're looking at going to Egypt in the 1800s somewhere, right? 18 something. You're going to Egypt. That's where Jacob, so that's Jacob. If Jacob's 1800, then roughly when's Abraham born? 21. So if you look at those dates, 21, that's got to be Abraham. 1876, that's going to be what? Into Egypt. 1446 is out of Egypt. 1406, entering the land. 1050. 1050, 1010, I looked at 1050 and 1010 and grabbed David there. Maybe David is 1050. I don't remember. But you can see, even if you don't remember all the details, you can start to plug in the history pretty quickly once you have a couple of the dates and you know some of the rough time frame of what happens before then. So pick a couple of dates, get those ones squared away, and you'll have the rest. Just to throw that out. Students will be able to apply knowledge of audience background issues, themes, and theology to a deeper study of the book. The purpose of a survey is that you can then dip into a particular book in more detail and know its context within the rest of the scriptures and the contributions it makes and what light it's giving. So you get the big picture and then you can start drilling in on details. Requirements, reading, we want to aim at about an hour of reading outside of class. As we go forward, we're going to suggest reading both in the textbook and in the Bible. We're not going to be expecting you to read through the whole Old Testament in the time of the course, because that would be a little more than an hour a week. But when you do the Bible reading and the textbook reading, you're probably going to be more than an hour a week. I tried to make sure that I wasn't asking for more average reader, more Bible reading than an hour-ish, and try to divide up the topics that way. But we'll see how that goes. But that's the expectation. The only required text then is the Old Testament survey, so that you can get that input into the course. And then we do recommend a study Bible, can be very helpful just for the other resources and tools that are there. There are several that we recommend that are listed here. The Ryrie Study Bible, which is the one I used, ESV, MacArthur, NIV Study Bible. Those are all good, have the same basic good resources and tools, which includes maps, includes some explanatory notes. Sometimes they'll talk about customs and so forth. Sometimes they'll mention historical issues and background, the cultural things that fill out the text a little bit. Satellite Bible Atlas, I'll give you a couple of pages out of that Bible Atlas when we get a little more into the historical books or the former prophets, where that'll be very helpful. And hopefully by then I've ordered another case of those. And if you want to get one of those, it's I think one of the better Bible atlases out there. We will build our biblical geography class when we're preparing for our next Israel trip. We'll use that atlas almost exclusively for that course. It's really helpful for understanding the events in the land and following the storyline. Major assignments, we want you to do a chart of the Old Testament books, and we're going to ask you to like to get a look at that chart roughly halfway through. So once we've gone through the law and the former prophets, think of historical books, 1st and 2nd Kings. We'll want you then to turn in an initial chart that describes, what it tells the category of the book. We'll talk about categories as we go. The theme of that particular book, the purpose of that book, together with any significant persons, events, and dates. And the exercise is for you to just have a quick reference as you're thinking about. We're going to be covering a lot of ground, and I'd really encourage you to fill out that chart as you go. And that's what I encourage from our New Testament course as well. Fill the chart out as you go, so you're keeping track of those things, and also you're not having a big rush at the end when you've got other things going on in that week as well. And oh no, I'm going to be late. Bob's going to mark it down. The reading assignment checklist, and these two assignments, the overall chart and the reading assignment checklist, those are required to turn in if you want credit for the course toward the certificate. I encourage you to do the reading. I encourage you to do one of the reasons we require that as part of that certificate program is because it's helpful. It'll help you put the whole pieces together. Otherwise, it'd be silly to require it, right? We'll also have a where is that? I didn't include that here in the syllabus, but I think it's on the schedule. Where is that found quiz. At the end, we're going to ask you, where's this found? Where's that found? Where's that found? You'll be surprised what you can then identify. Well, that is here, that is there. And we're talking at the book level, not chapter and verse. I'm not going to expect you in this class to go chapter and verse on particular events, random Bible trivia in the Old Testament. But I want you to know where the big items are, where to find them. Any questions so far? Yes? The certificate for our BP Academy, the certificate is, we have 9 classes required for BP Academy certificate. And it's just you've finished a course of study through these classes. And there are 5 classes that are required. Old Testament survey, so you are on your way. New Testament survey, Bible study methods, and then a spiritual life class. We've offered the spiritual life class once. We're going to revamp it and then be offering it again through this year in the morning classes. And then a Foundations of Faith or an Introduction to Theology class. Those are the 5 that are required, and then there's 4 electives then. And we've started in this year. Our first year was last year. We didn't do any electives. We did 3 of the core courses last year. And this year we've added a couple of electives already, and we'll continue to do that now. There's a wisdom books, a study in Proverbs being offered, and a small group leadership, which is an elective, but one of those 4 electives we want to be a ministry class. One that's not just more knowledge, but what do I do with what I know? Like how could I lead a small group? So one of those 4 electives should be a ministry elective. And so that would gain you the very prestigious, well-recognized, and nobody's even earned one yet, BP Academy certificate. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, then we'll move over to the course schedule. This will be helpful to you because this tells you You don't need an email from me now to know where we're reading next, where we're going to be next week. And we are taking a little bit slower pace than previous times. What we've learned in offering this course before is it was too rushed. So you might feel a little rushed, but you won't feel nearly as rushed. To give you a sample of that, Genesis through Deuteronomy were done in 1 hour and 15-minute session. And we're going to do introduction, but then Genesis today, Exodus, Leviticus next week, Numbers, Deuteronomy the following. So we're slowing down a little bit. You're welcome. And then you can see where we're going from there. In session 9, I mentioned the 12, but we're not doing all 12 of the 12. The 12 are called the 12. In the Hebrew Bible, the 12 are one book. But we're not doing the 12 altogether. We're doing the pre-exile, I think 9, and then we'll come back and pick up the post-exile last three, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, along with Daniel in a separate class. So you can see where we're going. I hope I haven't left any of the Old Testament out there. You check me on that and see if I did. Any questions about the schedule? Notice we took 1 week off in Thanksgiving weekend. And there are a couple places in there where we will have somebody else teaching the class because I will be away at those times. But one of those is Thanksgiving weekend, so that won't be a problem. Okay, well that means we can jump into those handouts that you were given. First of all, archaeological periods. Archaeological periods of the Levant. And with the Levant, let's open our book. The Levant is another way to say the Middle East, particularly the Fertile Crescent. Now, when I say the Fertile Crescent, what am I talking about? I'm sorry? Yeah, there's that where you go down to where the Tigris and Euphrates both flow into the Persian Gulf, following those rivers, because those rivers are life, following those up and around, and then coming back down following the Jordan River. And so if you go to the back, the maps in your textbook, the second map in from the back gives you what they're identifying as Babylonia. That's a pretty good representative of what we mean by the Fertile Crescent, the green section there in the map. Talk about the Fertile Crescent, that's what we're talking about. It's fertile because of the rivers. So yeah, go further over to the back. Second map in from the back, not from the front. Sorry, that was confusing. This is an Old Testament class, Hebrew, therefore you read from the back of the book to the front. And instead of reading from left to right, you read from right to left, yes, okay. So it's fertile because it follows the rivers. It's the crescent because it's crescent shaped. There you go, that makes a lot of sense, okay. And around, outside of that crescent, you have a lot of desert. And so people would not trek across the desert because there's no water. You would actually, when Abraham comes up from Ur of the Chaldees, he follows the river route and he goes up and around and comes back down for that very reason. When people traveled to and from Babylon, as would happen in the Old Testament, that's the route they took, and that's why. So the Levant. Archaeological periods, there are more before this. There's the Stone Age, the New Stone Age. The New Stone Age would be called the Neolithic. Lithic is the stone part. I didn't include those sections here. I started with the Bronze Age because the Bronze Age starts at 3300 BC. And that's going to catch most of our story. So I just started there just to keep it simple. And now bronze is divided into early, middle, and late. Then you have Iron Age, basically Iron Age 1 and 2. But then when we really get fussy about it, you've got 1 and 2, A and B, and it divides down even more. But we're not going to spend a lot of time on archaeological, but as you read, you'll read Bronze Age, you'll hear Iron Age. And before Bronze Age, I believe we had the Copper Age, actually, prior or following the Stone Age. But it's the type of metal that's being worked with. And then in the age of the empires, now we start talking about the empires. And so Babylon and Persia, the Persian period, the Hellenistic period would refer to the Greek Empire, starting with Alexander the Great. And then, of course, the Roman period with the Romans. So when you talk about archaeological evidences and so on, I'll give you a handout. I don't think I have it here. I have a handout for you in the future that talks about persons who are mentioned in the Old Testament whose names pop up in the archaeological record so far. And that's growing all the time. And even that list that I have for you is incomplete, but that's interesting. Both biblical figures that you're aware of, but also some of the other surrounding rulers are mentioned in archaeological excavations that I never look at archaeology to prove the Bible. Not interested in proving the Bible. The Bible is God's Word. I'm starting with that presupposition. I'm accepting that by faith. And yet, the archaeological record does give us insight into the history, and it's fun when this stuff gets dug up. As Jesus himself said, the rocks and stones will cry out, and it's fun to see that happen with a David. David never existed. Certainly there never was any Davidic empire. Oh, well, here's this inscription that they find up in Dan that actually discusses the Davidic empire and the sons of David and so on. Way up in Dan, far from Jerusalem. So that was interesting. And the Hittites. The Hittites are a people that Abraham buys a tomb from, and yet there are no Hittites. Never heard of any Hittites. Who are these Hittite people you keep talking about in the Bible? Well, actually, we know a whole lot about the Hittites today, the whole Hittite empire and where they come from and so on. So archaeology can be fun that way, but I don't look for it to prove the Bible. There's some again, these early time periods and how they relate to Jerusalem in particular. Why would I have a chart in here that tells you about dates relating to Jerusalem? Why Jerusalem in particular? Why did I not pick on Beersheba or Dan or Lachish for that matter, or Jericho? Jericho's older than Jerusalem. Why Jerusalem? Oh, sorry, Linda? Okay, that's the city where God chose to put his name. God said, I'll meet with you here. And so God made Jerusalem special. And it continues to be a center of conflict. People refer to Jerusalem as the navel of the earth. This is the center of the world. And that varies depending on who you ask. If the very center of that navel is the Temple Mount, or is it the Church of the Holy Sepulchre? That's another conversation. Important dates. So these are some of those dates we talked about. I'm not going to get into all the particulars of all of those, but you have something else fun that you ought to get familiar with. The different ages of this Old Testament time period. First of all, there's a patriarchal time period. You see that column over on the right-hand side? There's a patriarchal time period. Why is that called patriarchs? Who are the patriarchs? The fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yes. So think of Egypt, there's the patriarchs. Think of Genesis. That's the patriarchal age. And so then you have the, after the coming out of Egypt and even into the land, coming out of Egypt at least, that's the close of the patriarchal age. We are free at last, out of Egypt. Song of Moses. And then coming into the land and the conquest, you enter into the time of the judges. And there's one judge after another. We'll talk about the judges, so I won't spoil that now. And then, well, judges have been great, God, but what we'd really like is a king. And so we enter into the age of the kings. And first of all, the kings are Saul and David, and then Solomon. And then Rehoboam, but now we've got two lines of kings from Rehoboam, and there's a Jeroboam, and on the lines go now. So it's kings, two kings at a time. And that can be very confusing, because sometimes the kings in the different kingdoms have the same names, and I'm not going to ask you to memorize them all. But it's good to know the key players and where they fit and who's around them, and we'll try to do some of that. Then there's the Babylonian exile, and then there is the post-exile. There's a Babylonian exile, there's a Persian side of that exile. They go out to Babylon, they come back under Persia. Nehemiah, Ezra are in the Persian era. Esther is in the Persian era, for instance. And then the Hellenistic era is particularly, the Hellenistic period, the Greek period with Alexander the Great is after the close of the Old Testament. But it's important in that Daniel refers to it. Daniel describes things that are going to happen there, and then that sets up a lot of what we have when we come to the New Testament. Interesting books there concerning that Hellenistic period would be the 1st and 2nd Maccabees, for instance. Give a lot of history in that era. And then the Roman era, which comes into the 1st century and the birth of the church. How we doing? Okay? A lot of info, perspective so far. Let's go to the other handout now, peoples and covenants. We talked about eras. We've talked about, I'm going to send this around as well. I meant to do this early. If you just check that you're here and also double check your email. Just to make sure we have a good email address for you. Peoples and covenants. People are organized into family units, localized city-states, and around a common ethnicity. They're descended from the same people. It's a big, when you hear about the 12 tribes of Israel, tribes kind of throws us off a little bit with the American experience. We think of Indian tribes or Native American tribes. Each of the 12 tribes of Israel did not have their own casinos and reservations. Well, they kind of had reservations given by God. I guess you could look at it that way, but no casinos. They, but think of them as family clans. And so the nation is formed of these 12 clans that are all descended from 12 brothers that are all the sons of Jacob. And you have the same thing happening among the other people groups around them, especially the smaller people groups. You have a surrounding this going on within the land of what we know as the land of Israel, also known today as the land of Palestine or the Levant. Palestine is a newer name. It's a Roman name. Just so we can talk about that, clear the air. Palestinian. The Palestinians are not related to the Philistines, but when the Romans kicked the Jewish people out of Israel after the second revolt, Israelites revolted against Roman rule in AD 70. The temple was destroyed. And then there was another revolt after that in like 134 BC, somewhere around there. And after that second revolt, the Romans were done with the Jewish people. Like, you people are way too much work. And so they just expelled them from the area. They renamed the land. Instead of Judea, the land of the Jews or Jewish people, they renamed it Palestine, or naming it after the Philistines. That was a Latinized version of Philistine. And so the people there since have claimed that land from the Roman word Palestine, Palestinian, but those people are Arab peoples. They are not related to the Philistines, which was the name that the Romans used. So we don't know what happened to the Philistines, but the Philistines were not Arab people, and they were not native to the land. They actually were Greek island sea people that were just looking for a home, looking for a new place to settle out. They kind of got run out of where they were, and they were just looking for a new place, and this place looked good, and the coasts were nice, and they liked the coast, and so that's where they set up. And Israel ends up running into them. So the Canaanites, the Hittites, etc., these are family groups of people. We have major empires we're going to run into. In fact, these are the same empires that I mentioned. I mentioned in our study of the book of the Revelation, we talked about 6 empires, starting with Egypt. Who comes next? I'll help you. Ending with Rome. Fill in either side. Before Rome was Greece. There we go. Okay. See, sometimes you can't remember from the list down. We'll just go the other direction. Fill it in that way. Okay. Before Greece was Persia. All right. And there's Babylon. And Babylon took over from Assyria. So those are the cats. And it said when the cats are away, the mice play. And the Davidic empire grows. David's reign flourishes at a time when Egypt is in decline and Assyria has not yet risen. And so right in here you find David and Solomon and their big influence. At a time when when their empires are weaker, then these smaller powers, these other peoples within, like the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Midianites, the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Amalekites, the Girgashites, the Hittites, the Hivites, and on we go. All of them. And so those are smaller people groups that are in this area in between the Assyrians and Babylons up to the north and the Egyptians down to the south. And they keep getting kind of caught. So again, looking to your maps in the back, take a look at the very, very back map, very back page. Some have referred to Israel as the land between. It is a land bridge between three continents. Africa with Egypt, and Europe and the Hittite Empire starting up in modern-day Turkey and leading over to Greece from there, and Rome. Rome and Greece are European empires, and Assyria and Babylonia are more Asian empires. And so you have Israel as the land between three continents and multiple empires or cats. So you have the cats and the mice, and the cats are away, the mice will play. And that plays out in the Old Testament as well. We talked about eras. I pointed that out in the other chart. So I want to talk a little bit about covenants because we are going to take a approach to the Old Testament that really values what's going on in the covenants that God makes with His people. Now, sometimes you'll hear about covenant theology, and that's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about an emphasis on covenants that are made, that God makes with people, and we're going to come across the first of those in the book of Genesis. Well, a couple of them in Genesis, actually. God makes a promise, a covenant, what He's going to do with Noah. He makes a promise to Abraham. And that Abrahamic covenant is going to be huge. It's going to rule the rest of the Old Testament. 3 other covenants, it has been suggested, come out of, are connected to, have their roots in the Abrahamic covenant. So if you use the covenants as, in a sense, a bit of an outline of what's happening in the Old Testament, that will give you some pegs to hang things on. And we will be going back to that. So a covenant, it's kind of like a contract, but it's different. There are similarities, there are differences under number 3 there. Their contracts are time limited often. Contracts are transactional. Contracts normally have a requirement, you do this and I'll do that. I'll do that if you do this. And there's obligations on both sides. It's a transactional rather than relational. Covenants are relational. There's a relationship with people that forms a covenant. And a covenant, rather than being, in a sense, we kind of speak of conditional and unconditional covenants. But covenants by nature are not intended to be conditional in the sense that the covenant says, I will. A classic version of a covenant in the Old Testament world was it was called a suzerain vassal treaty. So you had the ruler, the ruling power, and you had the vassal states, those that were dependent upon the ruling state. At times, Judah or Israel would enter into this kind of a suzerain vassal treaty, but a covenant with Assyria or with somebody else, seeking to form an alliance. But when you do that, when one of the mice makes a covenant as a vassal with the suzerain, the reigning empire, the empire says, I will. The empire sets all of the conditions. They set conditions that are workable, that if everybody plays by the rules, this can work out okay for you too, and I'll take care of you, because that gives stability in the empire. If you just oppress and rob blind, you develop unrest that tears the empire apart. So when you have harsh rulers that make things harsher through their empire, that's when things begin to blow up. So the covenant is intended to be good for everybody. Think of the covenants as from a benevolent dictator, looking after all of his people, but with a huge mix of human pride thrown in. But God uses that covenantal model. And God says, this is what I will do. I have chosen you as my people to be in relationship with you, and I am making this covenant with you. And so as my people, this is what I require from you. This is what I'm going to do for you. But even if you don't do that, here's the thing that's different from a conditional contract. You don't do those things, you are still my people. We just have a different relationship. My relationship with you as my people is that I'm going to bless you in this land, but if you refuse to walk with me as my people in this land, you're not going to enjoy my blessings of this land, and they're going to eventually be expelled from the land. But yet they are still God's covenant people, and He has made a covenant with them. And so we'll see that tug-of-war, especially once we get to the prophets. So covenant is not a contract in that once they break it, well, it's done. No, there's still a covenant that God has made that it's up to God to fulfill. And God actually says, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the previous covenant, which they did not keep. Hebrews says, finding fault with them, He made a new covenant, Hebrews chapter 8. So the covenant is God continuing. And I think one of the aspects of the kingdom that we're coming to in the book of Revelation in chapter 20, one of the aspects of that kingdom is God will fulfill the Old Testament covenants that He has made with His people, Israel, and through them to bless the rest of the world. But now I'm leaking into the book of Genesis. Overall, a question about covenants and how that's going to relate, and what I mean by this is not covenant theology, quote, but we are going to be concerned with the covenants of the Old Testament. Okay, then on that, let's talk about Genesis, and Genesis forms part of the, if I can spell it right, Penta, is it Penta? I forget. Huh? A. Oh, thank you. It didn't seem right. Pentateuch? It means the five, okay? Not complicated. We could just say the five, then I wouldn't have to spell it. The five, the first 5 books, and those 5 are, well, you've got this. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Leviticus, oh, see, like just shortcuts. That'll never work. Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is not a duet, okay? That's how I start Deuteronomy right. Don't think duet and think, no, doesn't start that way. So you start with the E. There you go. Genesis is the book of beginnings, in the beginning. And Genesis is, how did we get here? How did we get here? Now, when I say, how do I get here, what do I mean? How do we get here? Okay, we think about creation. How much of Genesis is given to creation? 2 chapters, okay? And then what happens? We blow it. So also, think of, when I talk about how did we get here, think about the mess of humanity. How did we get here? How did we come to this? How did humanity become broken? That's the story of Genesis. Yes, we are created, and created is going to be important for the rest of the book. That God as our creator and thus our accountability to Him will be important for the rest of the book. But it's more than just that. It's the mess that is made, and what is God going to do about it? Exodus. What's Exodus about? If this, you could say, is about fall, Genesis is about the fall, it explains how that happened. Exodus is about redemption. And those who are redeemed, who sing the song of Moses, who have been brought out of oppression in Egypt to live a new life with God, that new life with God is a life of worship. And they will worship God, whom they walk with, live with by faith. The book of Numbers, wandering through the wilderness, where you have to trust God for what you do not see. Oh, sure, there's a land. Oh, sure, there is a flowing with milk and honey. Oh, sure, what a blessing it will be. When will it be? Have you brought us here all to die in the wilderness? Faith is a key in the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. They live, the fallen humanity redeemed to worship God by faith in covenant. Deuteronomy, the second law, reading the law again, is basically a reformalizing of the covenant that God has made with these people. So there's the first 5 Old Testament books in 5 words. Fall, redemption, worship, faith, covenant. All right, we can go home. Got it? Good. We've got another 45 minutes. What should we do? Well, we could open the book. We could open that book, and I have a Bible here somewhere. I apologize. It's been 45 minutes so far, and now we're opening the Bible. So if you're following, let's see, following the outline here that we had, we've talked about intro and syllabus, time eras, peoples, Pentateuch, beginning in Genesis, and so now we go into the book of Genesis. How would you break down the book of Genesis? If you started with the biggest hunks you could. Let's start there. And I'm assuming when I ask a few questions that you've read the book, but I'm also assuming you're a little hesitant about what you read and you're not sure, am I getting this right? I'm not looking for right, wrong answers. Let's brainstorm together, and maybe if I don't like the ideas that you've suggested, I'll also suggest a few of my own, but we'll come to some agreement together around that. But feel free to jump in and test out your tentative grab on it so far, and that'll help us as we're working together. So if you were to grab big hunks of the book of Genesis, you don't even have to start at the beginning. How might you do that?
Creation.
Okay, so we'll start with creation in the beginning. All right, what's another big hunk? Or even significant events. That might be an easier way to think about it. Significant events.
The flood.
The flood. Okay.
Fall in there.
Okay, yeah, which explains where the flood comes from. All right. After the fall comes winter and never Christmas. Okay. I'm sorry? Babel. Babel's actually going to be real important. Okay, now we're not dealing with really big hunks so far because all of this is in what chapters? 11. 1 through 11. Tower of Babel is chapter 11. That's how I knew that. I got to the tower. I just jumped to Babel. Creation is 1 and 2. The fall is in chapter 3. Everybody knows where to find the serpent. Okay? And after the fall, what happens after the fall? Immediately after chapter 3, what happens? Okay, Cain kills Abel. You see the direct impact of sin. And then after that, now in chapter 5, you have, it's not just an immediate family Cain and Abel problem, it's all of humanity. And you start to see this playing out as the bigger picture of humanity is given in chapter 5, such that we arrive in chapter 6, and all of humanity is thinking only evil continually. And so the flood comes. All right. Rinse and repeat. And after the flood, things are pretty good. You know, Noah, there's an altar, they worship God, things are pretty good, but then things are too good, and Noah gets drunk, and his sons do not honor their father, and things begin to unravel again. And it's looking quickly just like it had begun before. And then we get from out of that in about chapter 9, then we get to chapter 10, and from Noah and his sons, those 3 sons, there's the table of nations, and all these various peoples come from these descendants in this way, and yet they don't all scatter and fill the earth and subdue it. They gather together. Why did they build a tower? What's that all about?
Thought they could get to God.
Okay, maybe even we'll build a tower to heaven, maybe as our own access. There's something of the serpent's lie there. You could be like God, which came from his own imaginations because he himself intended to be like God. He intended to claw his way up. And so, yes, those following him would think they could too.
We're still doing it.
Yeah, and I wonder as well if the tower remembers the flood. Last time we got out of hand, God flooded the place. They're making their own, instead of a mountain, they're making their own high ground maybe too. It's a futile exercise. But does that keep us from doing it? We try to build our own security as well. It's the tendency of fallen humanity, and our efforts are just as futile as thinking you could. I mean, if this flood covered all of the mountains, could they build a tower tall enough? Not if they're building it anywhere on the plains of Mesopotamia. No chance. Elevation way too low. You're going to build a tower up on Ararat or someplace maybe, but it's going to be a little cold up there. It's going to be hard to grow food. So that's a problem. Our efforts are just as silly, just as foolish. But what else is wrong if that's what they're thinking? Hey, another flood could come and we're not going to get covered up with water again. What's wrong with that whole thinking? God promised not to do it, exactly. Yeah, rainbow. God had said, I will never again flood. You had nothing to worry about. God might get really fed up with you, but God said. And so the issue is believing or not believing, not taking God at his word. Yeah?
Do you know the span of years between the flood and the Tower of Babel?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm pretty good from Abraham on. In Abraham we meet next. But the time between Babel and Abraham, I'd be a little fuzzier on. Some study Bibles are really good about actually building that chronology. I'm comfortable with a young earth. I'm comfortable with a biblical chronology that gives us roughly 6,000 years. And if that stretches to 10,000 or so, okay, because generations, and there's some mixed generations, I'm not really comfortable with humanity being around much longer than that, just because it doesn't seem to be room for it in the Old Testament narrative from Adam forward, unless there's huge gaps. I mean, huge gaps. And well, I guess that's possible too, but that's my perspective, and good people differ on that. It's not really a significant issue. The idea of creation and then the fall, the creation of humanity and then the fall, and to not have these long ages of millions of years where death is occurring and fossils are created prior to the fall, to me there's another theological issue there. What's wrong with having death prior to the fall? Within creation as a whole, the cause of death is sin. And sin enters at the fall in Genesis chapter 3. So to make those 6 days of creation into these long million-year ages ignores that theological issue. But it's normally not a matter of, well, it is a matter of theology, because whatever you believe about God is your theology. And that leads to other suppositions. Okay, so we were building a timeline, or rather an overall outline of Genesis, and we have the first 11 chapters, which really set up for us the need. This is like if you were watching a movie, somewhere in here is when they stumble across the body. Okay? And now the plot develops on how we're going to unravel this and solve this. So we're just a few minutes into the story so far. Things were going great. They were sitting around a coffee shop or whatever, a little banter going on, and then somebody stumbles across the body, and now the story begins. Okay? What is God going to do about it? We've got a mess. It didn't take long to create it. It continues to show itself, flood and then babble, rinse and repeat. Okay? And what is God going to do about that? What comes after Babel? Abraham. Father Abraham. Okay. Genesis chapter 12. Abraham. First Abraham, then Abraham. Abraham. Somebody read the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 12.
The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you."
There are 3 things that are included, talked about, focused on, that are included in this promise, this covenant. And here, God has stated, this is what I'm going to do. You go, and I'm going to do this. And this promise that God makes here is going to be reiterated and restated and confirmed to Abram over and over again. It's then going to be stated and confirmed to his son Isaac. It's going to be stated and confirmed to his son Jacob. And so there's something big here to the rest of the story. And there are 3 pieces to it. He says, there is a land, there is a seed or descendant, and there is a blessing. Land, the seed, and the blessing. Where do you find the land? In these first 3 verses of Genesis 12.
I'll make you into a great nation.
Okay, I will make you into a great nation. A nation can refer to both the realm, the land, the territory, as well as the people within that territory. Go to the land that I will show you. Abraham packs up not knowing where he's going. He starts off following God. The people of Israel are going to do the same thing out of the Exodus, aren't they? They're going to pack up following God, not knowing where God is leading them. They just follow the cloud. When God packs up in the morning and heads out, they pull the tents together and pack their bags and follow. Wherever God's leading us, that's where we're going to go. And so there's a land involved here. To the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation in that land. Okay? Where do you see the seed or the descendant? Abraham is childless at this point, and it's going to be still for a while. I will make you a great nation again, okay? Out of you, you'll be a nation. So there's a sense there that there are people coming from him. I will make your name great. And Abram means exalted father. He's childless, but he's the exalted father that God addresses. And then, what about verse 3? What do you see there? In you, all the families. From you is going to come a great family, a nation, in fact. And in you, all the nations, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. And he further on will unpack these further, and you'll see more where he's going to say, every place where you set the sole of your foot, every place where your foot falls as you wander up and down. So you wonder why Abraham was a Bedouin, why Abraham traveled so much? He was investing for the future, man. God said every place he trekked, that was going to be his and his descendants. So man, I'm going to cover all the land I can. Abraham's a pretty smart guy. Watch out for those Bedouins. You don't want to try to trade with them. They're clever guys. But yeah, he's a Bedouin. He's not an empirist. He doesn't build an empire. Abraham's a wanderer. But think of him like a sheik, that he's a wealthy man. He's going to have herds and he's going to have 300 servants. They all live in tents, but there's a lot of tents in Abram's entourage. So God is going to, now these three, this is the core that's going to continue to be unpacked through the book of Genesis as the Abrahamic covenant. And there are three components of it that are going to be unpacked further in three other covenants. Or this is the framework that I like to think of it in. There is a land promise that's going to be further developed, and that's talked about in the Palestinian or Mosaic covenant. There is a promised descendant, a particular descendant in whom the blessing is going to come, and that is going to be expanded further in a Davidic covenant. And then there is a blessing by which all nations of the earth are going to be blessed, and that is going to be unpacked in the New Covenant. Extra credit points here. Can anybody tell me where we go in the Old Testament to find the New Covenant? Jeremiah 31. Jeremiah 31, among other places. How about the Davidic covenant? 2 Samuel 7. And the Mosaic Palestinian, the land covenant.
Seems like, is there one in Jeremiah that too?
Well, it's going to be referred to in Jeremiah, certainly, and Isaiah, and Hosea, and on and on and on through the prophets. At first, you come across it, and Mosaic is the key. Mosaic is the hint there. Sorry? Genesis 15. What's Genesis 15? What do you find there? What part? Okay. All right, so we read down a bit. Abraham is complaining to God, I don't have a son. I continue to be childless. The heir of my house is a servant from Damascus. God says, no, this man will not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. There's the seed again. And he brought him outside. He said, look at the heavens, number the stars. And so shall your offspring be. There's the descendants again. He said, verse 7, I'm the Lord who brought you out of Ur the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. There's the land, but this is all still to Abraham. So in chapter 15, again in chapter 18 of Genesis, you're going to have this Abrahamic covenant with those three aspects to it, land, seed, blessing included. But under Moses, and sum it up in Deuteronomy, especially Deuteronomy 27 to, let's say, 30-ish, 31, the conclusion of Deuteronomy, where he says, if you do these things, your enemies will run before you, you will stay in the land, I will bless you, it'll be an abundant land, I will send the rains. I'm not sending you to a land that's you're going to draw water out of the Nile, and the Nile's going to flood, and you can count on the floodplain in order to get your water for your crops. No, I'm sending you to a land where the water is going to come out of the sky. The water is going to come from the rains from heaven, and if you do not keep my word, if you do not walk in my ways, I'm going to withhold the rain. I'm going to withhold fruitfulness from you. That's the first thing. The fruitfulness of the land where they live and exist, and there's no river to draw on. The Jordan can't do it. If the rains don't come, the early and the late, the crops fail and the people are hungry and people die. It's serious. And you see that happen in Israel's history, don't you? For 3 years, it did not rain. And that's why. When you see that mentioned in the Old Testament, it's a covenant issue. And if you continue on and you will not repent in the midst of my chastening, God says, I will expel you from the land. In fact, God predicts this is what you're going to do, and this is how I'm going to have to respond. Because of your idolatry, I will expel you from the land, but I will bring you back. Because he is in covenant relationship with them. They are his people. So, the land, especially the blessings of the land, the fruitfulness of the land, their success in the land, their victories in the land, whether they flee before their enemies or whether their enemies flee before them. All of the tensions you're going to see in the book of Judges, the back and forth and who's on top and who's being oppressed, is a result of how they are responding to the covenant expressed in the law of Moses. How they are living in light of God's word is going to play out in their experience of God's blessing within the land. So Abraham is huge for the rest of the Old Testament, because these three pieces, which especially these two, bleed right over into the New Testament. Why? Jesus is the Davidic son. He is the promised descendant of David. He is, as is identified in the book of Matthew, which is the Gospel of Matthew is written to the Jews to identify to them their Messiah, and Jesus, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Yeah. So there you go. He is the promised descendant who inaugurates the new covenant. I will put my spirit within you. Yeah, and that enables us as a people of God to do what Israel could not keep otherwise. He puts his law upon our hearts, that we would walk in his ways. Okay, so we've got to Abraham. Abraham, we're going to run from chapter 12 then through what, roughly?
$25.
25. 12 to 25, we've got Abraham. And then who comes into play? Isaac. Is Isaac a big deal or a little deal? I'm sorry? You don't know? Okay. Anybody? Big deal, little deal, why?
Big deal, firstborn son.
Big deal, firstborn son? Oh, I have some Arab friends that would disagree with you. Okay, he's the son of the promise. He's not the firstborn son of Abraham, but he's not the son of promise. Paul's going to make a big deal about that in the book of Galatians. Yeah, he is, the tension through Genesis is, will there be a seed? That goes all the way back to Genesis 3. The seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head. And then one brother murders the other. Well, the good brother is the non-murdering brother, and he's dead. And the seed can't come from the murderer brother, so what do we do now? Seth comes along. God has given me a man, Eve says. Oh, maybe it's going to come through Seth. And so we're waiting to see, but it still doesn't turn out very well. And we're down to Noah, and on it goes, and it's just a train wreck. And God chooses Abraham, and the blessing is going to come through Abraham. But, okay, how's that going to work out? God promises. But have you been there? God says this is what he's going to do, and you're waiting. Oh, we sang about that this morning. How long, O Lord? How long? Yeah, that's Abraham's song, isn't it? How long, O Lord? It gets to the point that when God tells him, no, you are going to have a son. You are really going to have a son from Sarah. And he laughs. Abraham laughs. So what does Isaac's name mean? Laughter. Yeah, that's why. God has a sense of humor. God is telling us a story. It's a story for us. So Isaac's a big deal because this is the line of promise. But Isaac as a character in the story, how many chapters before we get to Jacob?
2.
Okay, 25 to 27-ish or 26 only? What is it, 27? Okay, so 26. And then from 27, you've got Jacob. Okay, so with Isaac, you had Isaac and Ishmael. We've got this tension. Who's going to be the son of promise? Okay, and this whole idea with Hagar, hey, I've got a plan. I can't have a baby, and God promised you, so going to be another way to do this. Take my handmaiden, and that was normal in the culture of the day. That's humanity's normal way. We've got an answer for this. We'll help God out a little bit, but that was not God's way. God said, no. I'm going to bring life where there is no life. And that's what he does, and he's going to do it through Abraham and Sarah. And so Isaac comes along, and now there's tensions between the two brothers because the one son of Abraham was ruling the roost. He was the only son of Abraham. Everything was going to be his. And now there's this little whippersnapper. There's tension in the family. And that tension is repeated, isn't it? Isaac has two sons. We have Jacob here, but who else is in the picture? Old Red. Yeah. Esau or Edom. Esau, Edom, red and hairy is in the picture. And so Jacob is a bit of a slight man. He favors his mother favors him. Is Jacob a mama's boy? And Isaac has Esau, who is red and hairy. And he's the outdoor man, and he's the hunter, and he's the man's man. I think Isaac comes across as a little passive. The wells are taken, Isaac doesn't fight back. I think Isaac sees in Esau all that he wishes he was as a man. And Isaac favors Esau. And yet, it's the older would serve the younger. God has chosen the second. There's something interesting going on there. God chooses the second. God works through him all the way to second Adam from above, Luther sang. Reinstate us in thy love. There's something going on there. But Jacob's significant up until another 10 chapters. Jacob is a bit of a deceiver. He's a bit of a trickster. And so what does God do with that? God introduces, let me introduce you to your Uncle Laban. Yeah, let's go back to the family roots a little bit. Back up a little bit where Abraham came from. And Jacob flees there because he has deceived in order to get the blessing from his father. He's deceived his father and he's denied his brother, and his brother's hot about it. His brother didn't put a lot of stock in the birthright. But he's angry that Jacob has cheated him out of his father's blessing. And yet there's a significance to that blessing that Esau doesn't realize, that he actually despised in despising his birthright. Traded that away for a bit of stew, and lentil stew at that. If you're going to trade away something valuable, get something more than lentil stew out of it, huh? Seems to me, but I digress. So we have Jacob. Jacob is a bit of a trickster. He's a bit of a conniver, and his conniving gets him in trouble, doesn't it? He meets his match in Uncle Laban. He labors 7 years for the woman that he loves. And what happens? He marries her sister. What a deal. He wakes up in the morning, be careful, don't drink too much on your wedding night, right? That's what you tell young men ever since. Be careful. Be careful at the wedding reception. Watch out for the champagne. And so then, how do they resolve that? You've tricked me. Well, I had this older girl. I can't marry the younger sister before the older sister. So he says, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. Work for me 7 years, and I will go ahead and give you the woman whom you wanted to marry. And so after the wedding week, after the celebration is over, then he gets to marry Rachel also. And yet, he has to work another 7 years. So after that 7 years or so, that's when Jacob then packs up and leaves, and he's ready to go home. He can't trust Laban. Laban has continued to cheat him and change the rules, and Jacob can't abide with Laban any longer. But what's wrong about going home? What's the problem with going home? He's going to meet his brother if he goes home. Now, when he left, I skipped Bethel. Bethel's important. When Jacob is leaving, he's fleeing for his life. His mother packs his bag, probably packs him a couple of lunches as well. And she sends him on his way, off to Uncle Laban. And when he goes there, on his way there, he stops at Bethel, and he has a rock for a pillow, and he has this dream, and he has this vision, and he sees angels ascending and descending, and this is the house of God, Bethel. Bet is house. And there, well, let's turn to that. It's a significant part of the story. It's in chapter 28. Jacob left Beersheba, and interesting, Beersheba. How did Abraham end up at Beersheba? So why is the family home there, down in Beersheba? Because Lot chose the cities of the plain. Lot chose the fertile Jordan plain. And so Abraham gives him that and turns far away so he can get away from Lot and separate himself as God told him to do. And so he chooses the area to the south, the Negev. If you look to the Negev, from Beersheba, you're looking out on the southern desert. It's not a great place to run cattle or sheep or grow crops. And yet, Abraham seems by this time willing to trust God rather than the look of the land. God promised him a blessing in the land, and so Abraham's willing to trust that even when it's hard. Can God really bless me in this land? And yet God does. So we get to Bethel. He's having this dream, and verse 13, the Lord stood above the ladder. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring will be like the dust of the earth, and they shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Have you heard that before? There's a land, there's a descendant, and there's a blessing. There it is. Confirmed now through Isaac, now to Jacob. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place. He was afraid. And so early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar. He poured oil on it, and he called the name of that place Bethel, the house of God. And Jacob made a vow, saying, God, I will follow you. God, I will do what you say. I will go where you go. I will do what you do. I will be your people. Is that what he says? No, he says, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. Oh, that is not a declaration of faith. Jacob's inclination is transactional. God, let me see what you do for me. And if that works out to my liking, then I will follow you. Then I will commit to you. But let me see it before I believe it. That's Jacob's statement. It's not a statement of faith. And so that's why when Jacob comes back, he's in fear of Esau. He never had to be in fear of Esau. He never had to be concerned about Laban. But he did not accept and then thus rest in God's promise. And so he's going to have to wrestle through. Literally. Jacob's wrestling is not with Laban. It is not going to be with Esau. Jacob's wrestling is with God himself. And that comes up several more chapters forward as we get into the story when Jacob returns. And Jacob wrestles with God himself, and God weakens him, and then God blesses him. And he blesses him when Jacob clings to him and begs for a blessing. I will not let go of you unless you bless me. I need your blessing. I am helpless on my own here. Still, Jacob can't get Jacob out of himself. Esau's coming, and he's sent. No, actually, this happened beforehand. He sent the families ahead, and who did he put last? Rachel and her child Joseph. Is there any favoritism going on here? Yeah, Rachel was his first love. I wonder if the other children and women sometimes feel a bit incidental. Rachel has always been his love. And so this whole other mess of all the conniving, look what it's bred. And it's caused this hostility that is now about to enter the story in a whole new way. Because from Jacob, we move forward, and who's the next big, significant player in the story? Joseph. You gotta love the story of Joseph. And Joseph runs from 37 to 50. By and large, the rest of the book. Joseph begins with man living with God in a garden. Genesis ends with Joseph in a coffin in Egypt. Interesting. And now we're waiting for redemption. You get a couple chapters, a quick backstory in Exodus to tell what happened in those intervening years, and then the redemption happens. But Genesis closes with Joseph in a coffin in Egypt. We started with life, we end with death in Egypt. Life in a garden, death in Egypt. And Egypt is going to represent oppression and bondage and slavery in the world. Wow, come a long way. So Genesis is not about creation. Genesis is a miserable book. It's a terrible story. It's a tragedy. But lots of the novels that you read, the movies that you watch are tragedies, aren't they? That is the human story. We are fortunate that the human story doesn't end in a coffin in Egypt. But let's dip into Joseph just a little more to unpack that. Here's a little more on your outline sheet here. I don't know if you're using this a bit for an outline for your notes, kind of tracking where we're going. But on that outline sheet, I should have like pointed that out earlier, right? That might have saved you some writing along the way. But next week you'll know. Okay. So we've got Abraham, and Abraham's also a story of emerging faith. You see, Abraham's faith is not so great at first. To jump back to Abraham just for a minute, how do you see Abraham's faith not so great?
Lies about his wife.
He lies about his wife. She is his half-sister, kind of. Why does he do that? What's he afraid of?
He's afraid he's going to lose it.
She's beautiful.
Yeah.
Sarah's beautiful. She's young and she's beautiful, and if what's the difference between him being her husband or him being her brother? Sorry? If he's her brother, then he's in control. Men would negotiate with him for her for marriage. If he's her husband, men must kill him in order to obtain him for marriage. That's the difference. He knows men are going to want her, but he's got a promise from God. I will bless you. I will make you a great nation. That doesn't happen if they kill you. So it's a matter of resting in God's promise. We can't be too hard on Abraham. We're going to have to be hard on ourselves. But Abraham does that. He does that twice, actually, doesn't he? What's the turning moment for Abraham in terms of his faith as God recognizes it? There's a couple.
He offered Isaac.
Genesis 22, when he offers his own son, God says, now I know that you trust me and you fear me. Yeah, he does what God says. And God does do what Abraham said. God will provide himself a lamb for the sacrifice, and God will. Oh, there's a hint. There's some foreshadowing of how this is actually going to play out. And we'll see it in Passover, but we will see it fulfilled in the descendant who is to come. So the hint of the descendant merges with a promise of a lamb to Abraham, but nobody knows it yet. That's the beauty of the story that God is writing. Nobody knows that yet. We can look back and see it now. John saw it. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. But nobody sees it at that moment. There's a ram. That's what? Lamb, ram? That's pretty close. I mean, it rhymes and everything. So, but also Abraham, in chapter 15, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him for righteousness. And yet his faith is weak. He's going to lie about Sarah again after that. His faith is weak. And yet he believes God concerning the promise. Even if he doesn't fully take the implications, even if he doesn't fully live in light of those implications that God will bless him and make him a great nation, but he believes God, and God counts it for righteousness. That's good news for us. Talk about, out of this story, relevance and application for us as well. There's another one. That our faith is not perfect either. And yet do not let the enemy use the weakness of your faith and the sometime failing of your faith. Do not let the enemy use that as an accusation against you to separate and drive a wedge between you and God. Because Abraham, Father Abraham, the father of the faithful, his faith wasn't perfect either. And yet it was a faith that saved him. It was counted to him for righteousness. Okay, jumping to Joseph. Back to Joseph again. Joseph, oh, what a story. Joseph the dreamer. Joseph is a brother. When he's 17 years old, his father has given him a special robe, and this robe probably suggests that Joseph doesn't do manual work. His brothers are out supervising the sheep in the field, and Joseph is not. Joseph's got indoor clothes. Joseph's suit and tie. Joseph is white collar. His brothers, his older brothers, are doing the blue collar work. That's kind of what this coat of many colors is like, okay? Of this nice fancy tunic. And so Joseph is told to go check on his brothers. And he's the youngster of the family, right? But is he? He's the firstborn son. But he's the youngster. But there are only 2 wives, and there are 2 maids or concubines. There are only 2 wives, and one of them was the first wife, but not the first wife by choice. So who is the firstborn? You see the tension that's come up in the family? Tension that's created in Jacob's own trickery comes back to him within his own family, and this tension in his family that causes the brothers. Joseph has this dream that we end up referring to in the book of Revelation. Joseph has this dream where the brothers are bowing down to him, and his father and mother even are bowing down to him, and this is a puzzling thing. And then Joseph says, hey, go check on your brothers. Oh, here comes that dreamer, gonna tell on us again. Yeah, let's deal with him once and for all. And they decide, first the plan is just to kill him. Sorry, Dad, your son got killed. We found his tunic. Is this his tunic? It kind of looks like his tunic. It's got some blood on it. I don't know what that means. We don't know what happened to him, but there it is. I guess he won't be the firstborn. Guess somebody else gets the supervisory role in the family now. Somebody else will be the heir apparent. That's what's going on. But then they can't help themselves. Well, we could let him die, but golly, we could sell him and we could get lunch money too. And so that's what they do. And they sell him to some traders who take him down to Egypt, and he's sold there off to the chief of the bodyguard. So the army chief of staff in Egypt has this new servant, Joseph, in his household, and Joseph is good. Why is Joseph good? Why is Joseph so good at everything he does? He's got the Midas touch. Why is that? God's blessing is on him. God's blessing is on him. God makes it good. I mean, I don't think it's simply because Joseph is the sharpest tool in the box. God's blessing is upon him and on what he touches and what he has responsibility. And God blessed him in Potiphar's household so that Potiphar gave him charge over everything. Well, except his wife. But his wife wanted Joseph to have charge of her too. And yet Joseph says no. Even when she's very persistent about it, but Joseph says no. And he flees the house, and so she lays false charges against him. And Joseph is condemned. Joseph is judged. Joseph is cast into prison for that which he did not do. The chosen son is rejected by his brothers. And he's cast into a pit. And he is falsely accused for the sins of another. And he bears that into punishment. But there in that punishment, God blesses him and everything he touches. And he becomes the golden boy of the jail. And the jailer puts everything in Joseph's charge because everything that Joseph does is blessed. I mean, this is the guy you want running your retirement account, right? Find me a Joseph. Okay, and well, there's these king's servants that are in the jail, and there's been a plot against Pharaoh's life. Somebody tries to poison Pharaoh, and his baker and his cupbearer. You know, that's how you poison somebody, you got to get through the food chain. And so was it the baker or was it the cupbearer? Who's in on the plot here? And Pharaoh doesn't know, so they're both in the slammer for now. But one of them is going to be released, and one of them is going to be executed. And Joseph's dream predicts it. And the cupbearer forgets all about him. Thanks, Joe. It's good to know you, man. Take care. God bless. Leaves him there. Until Pharaoh has a dream that nobody else can answer. And then the cupbearer remembers, oh yeah, there's this guy I met, when I was in the clink. There's a guy I know in prison, an old prison buddy. And that's the kind of connection you're looking for when you're bringing somebody up before the king, right? Yeah, I had this old prison buddy. Joseph. And so they polish him up quickly. They get him cleaned up, dressed up, shaved and everything. They get him before Pharaoh. He says, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen. Let me tell you about it. God's told you what's going to happen. And Pharaoh's like, wow, well, all of a sudden things fall into place. That makes a whole lot of sense. And this slave from prison is now exalted to the prime minister of Egypt. He sits at the right hand of the sovereign. And there he institutes this program where during the good years, Egypt buys up all the grain from everybody. Egypt later on, by the way, Egypt would become the storehouse of grain for the Roman Empire. And when one general wanted to become the next emperor, and yet somebody else was in Rome trying to also become emperor, what he did is he withheld all the grain shipments from Egypt. So grain's big in Egypt, and they're buying it all up off the markets, and they're storing it in all these store cities that Joseph has had built. And then the famine years come, and now the Pharaoh is making mint because he's selling the grain at a good price. And Egypt is rolling in the dough, but the rest of the world has food to eat because of Joseph and this preparation in advance. And there's these dudes that come down from Israel. Jacob says, we got nothing to eat here. I heard there's grain in Egypt. Go down and buy us some. And they do. And Joseph recognizes his brothers. They don't recognize him. Well, he's come a long way since then, right? He was just a 17-year-old whippersnapper last time they saw him, left him in the pit. And now he's developed into somebody. And they would never expect to look for Joseph at the right hand of the Pharaoh, right? Okay, fair enough. But he recognizes the rascals for who they are. And yet he doesn't reject them. But he tests them. Have they changed, or will they change? How will they respond, especially concerning Benjamin? Will they allow Benjamin to be lost the way they would have allowed him to be lost? Will they also toss aside his brother? Because Benjamin also is of no direct relation to them, at least from their mothers. But this time they don't. This time Judah, in fact, the lion whom through the Davidic kings will come, Judah steps up and said, take me in his place. He'll put himself in Benjamin's place. And Joseph becomes not only then the savior of the world, but Joseph is the savior of his brothers. There is a tradition in Judaism that there is a Messiah ben David who will be the coming conquering king. But there is also a Messiah ben Joseph. There is a Messiah who will be the son of Joseph, not necessarily descended from Joseph in the rabbinic tradition, but even in the 14th century AD, they were looking for such a Messiah who would come and rescue Jewish people in the midst of the medieval period. And this Messiah ben Joseph would be a Messiah who would come from God and who would take the suffering of the people and suffer in their place and deliver them and save them the way that Joseph did. Joseph is the picture of what God's promised deliverer would be. Chosen by God, chosen by his Father, let me put it that way. Chosen by his Father, rejected by his brothers, cast into a pit, raised up to the right hand of the Majesty, becoming the Savior of the nations, and as the Savior of the nations, also becoming the Savior of his own brethren of Israel. Have you heard that story before? And yet you hear it first in the book of Genesis. Comments? Thoughts? Questions?
I
Yeah.
have one question, backing up a little bit.
Mhm.
It says that Esau despised his inheritance.
He despised his inheritance, his birthright. Yes.
And it seemed like that's a strong word, so I was curious, what does that word despise? How is it actually translated?
Well, it means kind of what we would think it would mean in English. It's a good translation. It means that he thought little of it. It didn't matter. The inheritance, birthright, what's my dad really got? He can't even keep the wells. You know, Esau is a I'm going to go out and make my own way guy. He doesn't need whatever his father's going to manage to hold on to. He's going to make his own way. That's not a man who's looking at, no, the blessing is going to come from God's promise. Esau says, no, I've got this. I'm going to make my own way. I am the master of my own destiny. I am the captain of my own ship.
Maybe like the Tower of Babel.
Echoes of Babel. Yeah. But that's humanity, isn't it? We've got this. We will make our own way. It's hard. The offense of the cross is that we are broken people in a broken world in desperate need of a Savior. That I cannot do it myself. I cannot measure up. I cannot save myself. I need God's Savior. Yeah. A Savior like Joseph. Anyone else? Well, then we'll draw the line here. Only 3 minutes over. That's not bad at all for Bob. Daryl, would you close us in prayer? Just Lord would take his truth from his word and work it in our hearts.
We thank you for what we're going to learn, but more importantly, what we're going to apply. So Lord, give us insight into your word, the Old Testament, in a way which reveals the gospel message at the appropriate time. It reveals the things which you do at the appropriate time. And Lord, help us to continue to share the great love that you have for all these patriarchs and such, the patience you have, and apply that as an example in our own lives. Thank you for all this. Thank you for your word. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.